I'm gonna probably, perfect. I'll probably go off camera too, because it says my internet is a little unstable. And I think it does help bandwidth when people aren't on camera. But we would like Grace to be on camera. Thanks again to everybody who's here. I know a lot of people here have expertise and are working with people who are going through this right now. And I'm just so grateful that Grace is giving us this time. I know she's really easily the state expert, perhaps a national expert. It's not really my realm, but look, she's claiming it. She can claim it. So I'm just really grateful to have Grace Ross here to talk to us about eviction and foreclosure, homeowners' rights, the psychological aspects, and this is a big trauma. So thank you. Anything else, Kelsey, besides we're muting people if they're not Grace? I can spotlight Grace so that everybody should be able to see her. And there you go. Thank you so much. I'm turning it over.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is a huge opportunity for us. We've known, the leadership of our movement has known literally for years that we needed some assistance from folks who have the bandwidth and perspective of dealing with this kind of trauma. To ground us a little bit in context here, you know, when the folks who wrote the Massachusetts Constitution wrote it, they had just come out of a war. They clearly understood the value of life and liberty, and they put on an equal footing in terms of centrality for humanity, property. And they didn't mean your flat screen TV. They literally meant real property, your home, your farm, the place where you live. Bizarrely, in the development of our state and country, somehow that recognition of the centrality of human life, of your home, dropped off. Life and liberty remain, you know, things that you get a state prosecutor to help you back up if someone tries to take them. But your home somehow lost the centrality that life and liberty had, but not in terms of real human life. I'm often thinking about how central the home is to our humanity is reflected in a lot of other cultures. Traditional cultures, often when someone died, they burned down that person's hut. And they did that because they understood that part of your spirit lives in your home. So when your home is ripped away from you, those cultures would recognize that part of your spirit got ripped away from you. That level of human damage has somehow been minimized in a shocking way. But for those of you who've been through fighting for your home, the common thing that people get told is, you know, oh, well, you know, you're in a foreclosure, it's a big fight. Just give it up and get over it. And for anybody who does any kind of counseling, those words should be familiar. That is what women who get raped get told. And what we know is that there are certain kinds of human psychic damage that you don't really ever get over, in the sense of it being like something you can forget about that's happened to you in your life. And this is one of those things. I should say a little bit about my background. I'm Grace Ross. I'm the coordinator of the Mass Alliance Against Predatory Lending. We started coming together in 2007. We really established ourselves as an organization in 2008, and I'm the chair of the Worcester Anti-Foreclosure team. I have been a tenant in a foreclosed property, but that's part of the trauma, but by no means the full story for somebody who has invested their life's labor, wealth in a home with the expectation not only that you will live in that home, maybe raise your children in that home, but that it's your home for the rest of your life, that it's a place you can grow old and die in. It's a place that we've all been told is often the first foothold into having wealth that you can hand on to the next generation. And so it is a core central life investment in so many ways that it's hard to capture all of it. I think I should also say the Mass Alliance Against Predatory Lending is the only statewide coalition and has been the only statewide coalition fighting this historic rate of predatory loans and foreclosures in the country this entire time. And it appears from some research that was only partial, but that was done by a class at Northeastern Law, that we are, because we are the only grassroots coordinated effort, far out front of any other state in terms of not only taking on this injustice, but moving it in the right towards resolution in the right direction. So unfortunately, it is probably true that I really am the expert in the US on this. I also should say that part of the perspective I bring to this is that my undergraduate and master's degree, the topic focus was post-traumatic stress. So it happens to be something I actually have a big background in the academic sense. So I think it's important. We think of trauma, I think, often as like a single horrific incident. But we also know that trauma is how oppression is laid in. When something is traumatic enough, there's a way in which our consciousness as a being lives in that place. It's as if part of us gets frozen in time in that traumatic moment or traumatic moments. And that's important to understand, partly because this trauma is a systemic one. It's one that is being intentionally, by hugely powerful players in our society, laid into people. And the pattern of predatory lending, the way that they're setting people up with unaffordable loans that are, quote, doomed to foreclose, as our great Chief Justice Gantz from the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court coined the phrase, they are doomed to foreclose in the sense that the people who, the entities that are giving these predatory loans are giving them with the intent that you will not be able to afford the loan, that you will invest everything you've got trying to save the home, another, as I was saying, core element of our humanity. They know that you'll throw everything you've got at it to save the home, and then they'll foreclose. So they are literally setting people up knowingly to take your entire life's savings and the next generation's inheritance and a fundamental human element of your humanity. We know this because the structure of these loans, while it's become complicated with all sorts of fancy legal language and legal structure, well, illegal structure, is a setup that was actually created coming out of emancipation to ensure that no Black freedman would be able to hold onto a piece of property if he could ever afford to buy one. And that pattern that's over 160 years old was then effective enough. It becomes the basis of what's colloquially known as redlining in the 1930s, when the federal government finally got involved with backing loans. They didn't want to back loans for people of color or anybody who lived in a community of color. And so they created what they called redlining. That got legally outlawed thanks to the massive efforts of the civil rights movement in Massachusetts and across the states sometime in the early 1980s. But the lasting impact of that policy pattern, for instance, is seen to this day. The communities that were hardest hit by COVID, the communities that in the last downturn had the hardest time bouncing back from unemployment, the health impacts, the neighborhoods that to this day tend to be the most disinvested in, shall we say, remain, if you map them, almost a perfect overlay of the communities that were redlined out of financial support by the US government and the banks in the 1930s. So this has been a lasting intentional pattern that by the time that legal redlining gets outlawed and women fight finally to be able to get credit equally in their own name in the 1970s, we hit this generation where we had a slew of people for the first time in a position to buy a home with credit under their own name, and they become the easy pickings of a predatory industry, knowing that these would be people who would not have a sort of familiarity, a sort of an intergenerational experience of what it means to buy a home, borrow money, and keep a home. And they went, oh, okay, we have a whole bunch of folks we can now target and make more money off of these folks than ever in the history of this 160 plus year strategy. And understand the research appears to show that this predatory lending has been the largest revenue stream of uber wealthy white folks in the United States since it commenced over 160 years ago. So it is a deeply embedded injustice in our society. And we see it surface as one would see any oppression surface, with blaming the victim. So as soon as it kind of hits consciousness in the broader society that there are all these people facing foreclosure, the first thing we hear is blaming the victim. You bought too much house. You want a free house, et cetera, et cetera. When the judge who did the primary questioning in the last two major cases in the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court started on with this vitriolic attack on people, the homeowners who were watching in those two oral arguments, I started getting calls from people saying, oh my God, I feel like I'm being re-traumatized. Listening to this guy go on and attack the homeowner and blame the victim, I feel like I'm, I can't even listen. It's so damaging emotionally and spiritually. So this onslaught of an intentional oppression is then experienced individually as shame, as if it was the homeowner's own individual fault, which is pretty much always what happens. Those of you who study this know this, that when there is kind of a socialized mantra of blame of the individual, that shaming then has become very hard for people to even talk to other people about the trauma they're going through. They literally find that we have people in our leadership, the homeowners who are fighting for their home, who lost their entire family, essentially. All the adults in their family don't talk to them because they've bought the blame. They've bought the idea that this was this individual person's shame. And have found themselves then not only in this very traumatic experience that, as I said, historically would be recognized as one of the most profound traumas you can go through, but they're living in a culture at a time when the blame is and the shame is being targeted individually, and now they've lost their voice, their sense that they can talk about what's happening to them, what's happened to them, the trauma they're going to potentially carry for the rest of their lives. They often then also have lost their family. They've lost their friends. They've lost their coworkers, the people they've naturally would reach out to for emotional or spiritual support are often the very people who've bought into this shaming and proceed to multiply the shaming that's being done to the person who's fighting, in a sense, for one of the elements of their very survival. I haven't gone through this, but I do, live in the emotional experience of the people I work with. And I want to acknowledge that I'm carrying uh, there's a term for it. It's not coming to me, but anyway, I'm carrying the trauma of watching this hundreds of times. And I keep thinking to myself, I sold a home I grew up in my early 20s, and which is a different story. But I remember thinking to myself that the one thing I was sorry to sort of sell was the door jamb that had all the little markings of how tall I got and how tall my brother got over our childhood. And I keep thinking to myself, what do you do if you're a parent and you're raising a child in this home and you're fighting for 10, 15 years to hold on to the home? Does every time you walk past that door jamb, does something in your stomach kind of twist? And you think to yourself, am I really going to have this memory? Are my kids going to have this memory for the rest of their lives if we want it or not? It means that the trauma, the sadness, the sense of loss is being laid in for some people over years and years and years. Those profound sort of little intimate things that make our humanity what it is. How often are you saying goodbye? How often are you losing again and again and again that personal connection? And it struck me that to the extent to which these loans have been purposefully targeted at immigrant communities, at people of color, at women heads of household, of course, once they succeeded in attacking all of those populations, this has been expanded to white working class families, et cetera, as well. But it seems to me that we've got individual trauma, but then we also have group trauma. We have whole communities where the decapitalization has impacted how often kids are moving from school to school, which we know undermines kids' ability to do well in school. How often, have people had to give up a small business, given up what might have been, a lot of people have these memories as kids, like, oh, on Sundays, we used to go get ice cream every Sunday at such and such a place, or whatever those kind of meeting spots that a family builds into its sense of place. You can't afford it anymore. You don't go anymore. You can't do those little things that build up a family tradition. And when we then shift over to the fight against evictions, which at this point is Massachusetts is somewhere around 30,000 households have been given forcible removal orders since COVID. And those 30,000 households, not one of them had due process rights in court as part of that eviction case. A lot of them, and a growing number, are being evicted without any eviction case at all. And the housing courts that do the vast majority of the evictions suspended all due process rights in eviction cases coming out of COVID, and they are still suspended. So people are also having the experience of being abandoned as a human being in the most fundamental constitutional sense in our state. So now you've got the loss of home, you've got the loss of family, work, and friend connections too often. You have a sense of self-shame that it was somehow your fault. Even the folks who I think intellectually know that's crap, it's still hard to avoid the emotional impact of that kind of messaging over and over again. And then you have the experience of being abandoned by the social structures, the constitutional guarantees that is kind of it's like the white noise in the background that you don't think about. And yet it is often one's sense of safety that if all else failed, well, at least we have a constitution with some rights. No, that is not what people experience. And then unfortunately it gets worse, because if you do get physically evicted against your will, against your rights, knowing that it's illegal, but you have no money left to move somewhere and move all your stuff, you're now at the mercy of our physical eviction process at the end of the legal or not legal process in court. We know, and we've been fighting, that the vast majority of those physical evictions are being done by people who are not licensed to do them. Since the Police Reform Act, they've not gotten the use of force training to ensure that we don't have a George Floyd style murder on our hands. So they may put their hands on somebody and physically harm that person, permanently disable them, and our courts are not willing to stop them from doing it. Attached, unfortunately, to this is then an industry that's supposed to be, that was put in place to protect your personal belongings. Because in an eviction, they only have a right to take what's referred to as the bricks and mortar, right? The house. They don't have a right to harm your personal being, any other members of your household, and they are to preserve your personal possessions. But the eviction warehouse industry, we know, destroys people's personal possessions, does not warehouse them legally, and it appears they fence your valuables. So now we're seeing something that, if this was recognized as it should be, as a unique oppressed group, we have the further piece that you may have lost your community, your family, your support system, all these other things. And then on top of it, you may well lose the personal possessions that, again, give meaning to a human life. One of our members had knew her stuff was in trouble, went through extensive lengths to get to it. They had damaged a lot of her stuff. Much of her stuff wasn't there. The washing machine was broken and not even worth moving. She said to me, Grace, the one thing I want is I have this hand, I don't know if it was a painting or drawing, that means everything to me. It's worth nothing to anyone else. They'll never sell it for money. But if I could just get that one thing, and that's such an expression of one's humanity, right? Those special keepsakes that may be worth no monetary value, but become part of our identity, part of our meaning making in life. That's what she wanted. She got it. But for many people, they don't. They lose everything. And if they raise their kids in that house, and maybe their kids are still young, and everything gets taken, the children lose all of their sense of possession and those special keepsakes as well. So we're seeing an intergenerational harm, not just the loss of an inheritance that is sort of part of the American dream and the American story, and sort of the story of getting a foothold by owning a home, but the personal valuables, the things that give meaning that you carry with you all the time, many people lose those as well. So I think let me stop there. I want to say a little bit about what we know about the way the trauma sits for people, but I've given you a lot of information already. And I don't know if any of the folks on want to ask a question for clarification or something. Amy, if that would be appropriate.
A
That would
great time to
absolutely be
stop for
appropriate.
questions. Sorry, Amy, I spoke over you.
No,
Yeah,
that's okay.
I know just in the past 30 minutes or so, I came up with 3 or 4 questions I have listening, and I didn't want to interrupt because I was so captivated by each piece of the next information, right? Almost like the next horrible thing and the next horrible thing. I wanted to ask about the due process piece you talked about. I don't understand much of that. And so if you can break it down further, or, how did courts work before and how are they working now? Any
Right.
clarification there would be really
Right.
helpful.
Right. Well, so our entire legal system that we kind of, I think, rely on as a backdrop was purposefully a core piece of our constitutional creation as a state and as a nation. The concept being that if you get in court, you're supposed to be under the same rules, you and your opposition, and you're supposed to have an equal ability to advocate for what is true. And based on that presumption that the procedures will be even-handed and you will get an equal chance to give your information and to reference it to our existing laws, which are supposed to be an expression of our common values, that out of that will come a just resolution. And that's basically the definition of due process. It is embedded in our procedures in many different ways. But every legal case that you go into, there are what are referred to as due process rights and rules. And those rules are supposed to guarantee the even-handedness of the process, so that if someone sues you, you're supposed to know from the original suit the general gist of what they're going after you for. So from day one, you have an ability to defend and address what they're saying happened. And with that is supposed to come some basic procedural rights, the right to answer, the right to discovery, which is supposed to get everybody's facts on the table so that you're working off of the same basis. The right to be fully heard, the right to a jury trial, the right to file motions, the right to be equally treated by the judge without partiality or prejudice. And out of all of that, eventually a series of hearings that are supposed to get at the truth, where your sworn word, for instance, if it's based on personal experience, is supposed to be given as much weight as the other side. With the level of prejudice that people have been facing in the courts, that equality of treatment by the judges was almost impossible to receive. But coming out of COVID, with the special procedural rules for eviction cases that are supposed to give defendants more protections and more rights, actually, because again, your home at some level, our legislature recognized was one of your 3 constitutionally guaranteed unalienable rights, those extra procedural rules to protect you, the housing courts declared, and it's right on the Mass Gov court's website, that those rights, those rules, and therefore those rights were in suspension. So we had an informal bias and partiality that was making it very hard to get justice. And then they went public with it, coming out of the COVID moratorium. Did that answer you, Kelsey?
It definitely
You're
did.
muted.
Thanks, great. Thanks, Grace. It did. And I see that Kanisha has her hand raised to ask a question next.
Hi, Kelsey. Hi, Amy. Thank you, Grace, for being here. Hi, everyone. I thank you for the
Kanisha.
information that you're sharing. I'm going to be vulnerable because I do have a question, and I thank Amy for allowing me the space to share with her first. And something you said, Grace, it's what's emboldening me a little bit right now to ask. I'm facing a housing insecurity situation right now. I thought I was the only person going through this. And I felt ashamed because I'm a citizen. And if you look at my surface, I recently just graduated. All the things, yay, but not actually nay. Um, I've been going through some stuff with the apartment complex where I've only found out recently they've been systematically targeting people in my building who have the income driven leasing connection. They're trying to, I didn't know that this was even a thing. So I wanted to ask I guess your opinion or feedback about that. Um, some of my neighbors of various ethnicities, they've been getting the notifications, but all the things that are in common is that we have the income driven, we're income driven, and they're trying to get a lot of us out. I just recently,
You're talking, Kenesha, let me just clarify. When you say income driven, you mean you have a income-based subsidy?
yes. Sorry, I wasn't sure how to put that. I didn't want to be disrespectful to terminology. I just knew that it, like the first
No,
couple of words. So
oh, good.
I
I just was
apologize about
trying to
that.
clarify. No, don't
Okay.
apologize. I was just trying to understand. Go ahead.
No, and I appreciate that. So I guess I have my questions are, I received a housing document. I have to go to housing court, and I already been to housing court, and we came to an agreement. But because I didn't pay an extra $5, which I didn't even know, which is why we're back in housing court. So it seems like it's utterly ridiculous, but it's bringing up trauma that I didn't even know that was still there. So in addition to me having been scammed, like I thought I applied for a loan in December. It actually was a scam. They cleared out my whole account and people are all like, congratulations, all the things. I'm like, yeah, nobody knows except for I think I shared like I know I told Troy, I don't know if he's here, and a couple of people, because this is embarrassing, right? I should know better. I help people through DV situations, I help people and all the things, and yet and still I'm looking for a job and I can't, and I'm about to have an eviction and I can't. And so I wanted to know in this whole convoluted statement, first and foremost, thank you for what you're doing. Is there anything I can do? Because I do want to move, but I don't want to move right now. Um, I'm not
Well,
sure how to move, like what to
yeah,
do.
yeah. Well, the first thing I want to encourage you is to stop blaming yourself. Even the way you tell the story, you're taking on more responsibility for this than you should. There's a thing called being rent poor or housing poor. That is, you're paying more for your living circumstances than you really can afford, even by very long-term established equations of what's affordable. We are in a time period in the United States where there are more people who are housing poor than percentage-wise than ever probably in our history. So this is totally not your fault. The reason that we're seeing such extraordinary number of evictions and people homeless on the street, and our state government even walked away in the person of Maura Healey from our commitment to ensure shelter, at least for people. So this is totally not your fault. And I want to encourage you to not blame yourself for being swept up in an intentional trend. Um, the reason we have this massive percentage of folks facing being housing poor is because the foreclosures, the way they set people up to be foreclosed is to drive up the housing prices far beyond any real
Yes.
value. Seeing the rents then get pushed up behind that. And it's part of why those of us who are engaged in this fight understand that we are in one of the historic battles for justice of this generation. But because the shame is so deep, people don't know it. People don't know this is one of the biggest fights, like climate change, etc. It will be one of the be looked back at as one of the biggest fights. So the first thing I want to encourage you to do is to let go of blaming yourself. All those ways that you've framed, you should have known better, blah, blah, blah. looks at this as if it was based on individual choices you made. And percentage-wise, it's not at all that. You got swept up in a trend of injustice. The second piece related to that is shame tends to isolate us.
Yes.
So one of the things that I strongly encourage you to work against, find 2 people in your life who are capable of seeing you for who you are, not blaming you for a systemic problem, to whom you can go. You need to have people when you're having to kind of keep your energy up, to keep fighting your way through unjust systems. Trying to do it alone it's almost like it adds another layer of damage. So I want to
Yeah.
strongly encourage you. There will be people in your life who will not be capable of getting past the prejudice and might blame you. Do not talk to them. They're going to play into a shaming pattern that's very damaging to your humanity. But find the few folks that's not true of, and freaking have coffee with them once a week, just to shoot the shit, so to speak. Whatever it is, to remind you of your humanity and your wholeness, even in this situation. Practically speaking, we don't know what the housing courts hold. In the situation you've described, I would be inclined to, we don't go to mediation by ourselves because we don't trust the mediators. But again, if you can find one of those friends who can be genuinely supportive, look you in the eye and remind you of your total humanity, then I would ask one of them to go with you to the mediation and see if you can just mediate your way out of the $5 and get an agreement that would give you enough time to move. I'm sorry, I need to mute for 1 second here because I got to figure out what this call is. I don't even know how to mute. Maybe someone can mute me.
Amy, I saw you take a breath there.
Yeah,
That's-
I was thinking, well,
Yeah.
Grace takes her call, so many of the things that she said really resonated as part of how we understand trauma, right? Like that there really is so often a macro, a government, a policy issue that was intentionally set up without the input of people that it will affect. And then it moves from there and there and there. And then it operates at the individual level, even though it's this policy level thing. And people experience exactly what people here have shared, feeling like it's their fault, that they're to blame, the shame, not talking to people, losing support of people that were supportive of them. It's really it's so helpful to sort of see it laid out like that. And that's why Kelsey, like that's why we do this work. When you see that it's not you, that it's the map, that you're just somewhere you didn't even know that this path was set out for you. When you see that it's not you, it is really the most helpful thing. And so I'm grateful that people have had the opportunity to see that they're not alone. I know that there's people in the audience that have been through this, and I'm just so glad that we are creating a space where people can talk about it and share about it and know that it's not them and there's help available. And this is an
Going
injustice.
through it. Well, and I appreciate, you say you felt vulnerable, but see, this is one of those places where your vulnerability is healing to other people. To hear what you're struggling with helps other people recognize that it's not them also. And this is part of the healing process from any kind of oppression or shaming, right? I mean, we think about the power of what happened when folks started using the hashtag Me Too and telling the stories that as women, we pretty much all of us have had experience of one kind or another of sexual mistreatment. And it created a different conversation where finally we could kind of come out of the woodwork and tell our stories. By your bringing your vulnerability, our culture tends to identify vulnerability as weakness, but vulnerability is strength. It is, in fact, the very thing that transforms human experience. And that was kind of the other thing I wanted to talk about, that when we're fighting shame, one of the most effective healing techniques is to find an accepting audience to tell your story. And the more often you tell your story in an audience that is going to continue to recognize and value your humanity, that is actually how you lift shame off. And so our tendency to want to isolate is actually counterproductive to the healing process. Obviously, you need to pick your audience well, because if they're going to jump on the shame and add to it when you're being vulnerable, that's worse. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today is getting us past the kind of shaming, the kind of trauma, and using the skills that we know we have as just human beings with other human beings to do the healing work. I see somebody else has their hand up.
Billy, go ahead and jump right in and ask your question.
Does he need help unmuting or something?
Yes, he does. Hold on one sec. Trying to come off mute. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I also have actually lost two homes. Two. Both family homes for me, my spouse, and our four children. And whether or not there is predatory lending, I can't say. I know that it does feel like dirt to lose your home. We're not from my dad's family is from poor, but he joined the army. So I grew up generally middle class. He was an officer, so maybe a little better than middle class. Mom was an immigrant from Germany, but I guess what I'm ultimately getting at is how do you speak to somebody like me, right? I'm not a person of color. And when I hear a lot of this come back that the system's set up, all you guys have it, it's good for you, everything's fine. And I did catch, later when you were talking a little bit of how it's been expanded into working class families. But I'll tell you, as somebody like me that's being told, um, the system is set up for you, and then you fail. There is no I get to blame a system against me. So how do you speak to somebody like me? And this is all true story. I mean, I'm not joking. It's
No,
excuse my
Billy,
language, it
I
sucks to
no,
lose a home twice.
no, I hear you. And the chances are good, given the percentages. I mean, I don't know if there was an actual foreclosure, but given the percentages, if you're Massachusetts and there was an actual foreclosure, I can tell you right now it was illegal. There were only about 14 out of the 130,000 foreclosures that were not illegal. And in terms of predatory lending, the chances, I don't know when the mortgages were gotten, but if the mortgages were gotten between about 2003 and 2008, I can again almost guarantee to you that it was predatory. The part of the problem with our society's analysis of racism and sexism, et cetera, is that we act like, to use a funny analogy, that it was black and white. We know any oppressive system does not create a perfect boundary around what's going on. The civil rights movement ended the poll tax in the southern states that made it too costly, and removed the equal guarantee to vote. But the poll tax took out lots of white working class folks too. And so because we have this kind of misperception of how oppression works, as if it was an on-off switch and you're either in it or out of it, we then miss what's going on. So the trauma you're describing is, there's no way to say what's worse or less bad in terms of bad trauma. Bad trauma is trauma that's bad, but it is laid in a little differently. So where I was talking before about the individual blaming piece being so destructive, for somebody like you, it's going to be even harder to break through that internalization of individual blaming, because the public messaging that sort of says, oh, well, you wouldn't have been part of the systemic injustice, and therefore it really, really, really must be your fault, is a different kind of also really high hurdle to get over. I would assume that it's not your fault. I could look at the history with you if you wanted me to and show you how it was systemic. But the injustice you experienced is likely to be systemic. And it doesn't help you one way or the other to have this mantra in your head saying, well, you're not one of the targeted, the usual suspects for targeting, therefore you weren't targeted. Unlikely to be true. Much more likely that you were part of being netted by this vast, historic, unprecedented rate of predatory lending. And even if that weren't true, which I think is highly unlikely, the trauma of losing a home against your will is still there. So address it for what it is. It's something that in a just society, human beings would rarely, if ever, go through, because we know the importance of home. And, you know, there was a bumper sticker that folks started putting on their cars in the 1980s when we went as a society from being primarily owner occupants of homes to investors owning homes. People had a bumper sticker that said, nobody gets two until everybody gets one. Everybody needs one home. And this is just a human necessity. And the idea now that we have a huge, unprecedented rate of people being, what, as I referred to it, housing poor, tells us that whatever the larger social impacts are, it's systemic, because it wouldn't be so widespread. So I want to encourage you to look at this as likely to be part of a systemic injustice and take that sense of individual blame and shame off. You know, the analogy, unfortunately, of rape, some women find the way that they try to handle rape, they try and find an individual reason why they were responsible so that they won't feel like they might be in danger of being raped again. That's a losing argument. I'm sorry, I have to check this call.
Thank you all for the good questions and sharing your stories. I see in the chat there's lots of folks sharing empathy with each other, sharing their own stories, even if they didn't verbally share it with the whole group. So definitely, if you are feeling alone or isolated, check the chat too, because my hope is that everyone leaves this training feeling like, whoa, I'm not alone. It's not me. I'm also reminded of a quote that Amy shares often from Brene Brown that says, if you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 ingredients to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. If you put the same amount of shame in a petri dish and you douse it with empathy, it cannot survive. And so I hope, if nothing else, you've got some empathy to take with you today to squash that shame.
Hello? I'm about to come.
That sounds like a Zoom bomber. You gotta mute
I
that.
know I'm trying to figure out who it is and get them out of here.
Okay, I think you caught it.
That's Zariah. Can I say something, please?
Yes, please. Absolutely.
Yes, good evening. Well, this is Pierre.
I'm busting. I'm
Uh,
busting.
so sorry. Kelsey, did you get that?
Oh my god.
I think you gotta
Oh.
kick that person out. Let me see.
Oh.
Hello, I've removed two participants. I think it was two people. And we won't be letting them back into the room intentionally. I mean, of course, it could happen unintentionally. My apologies.
So sorry, everyone, that that happened. I think it really does speak to this whole idea of victimization too, and people, you know, sort of trolling out there for people that are already hurting. Grace, I'm hoping you're still there and able to jump back in. I know that people had a sort of a lot of, I was coming up with a lot of specific questions about the ways in which this is structured. Things like for $5, there's a proceeding moving forward, or the house being taken for what's owed and not anything else being able to be recouped for losses. Grace is on the, hi. Okay. All right, I'm trying to figure it out. Thanks, sorry. Kelsey, do you know how to?
Hi,
Oh,
can you hear me?
yeah,
I've
You
got
can?
I've got the ability to unmute, but not the ability to turn on my video.
there you go. Did that do it?
No,
All right,
I'm
so
changing
sorry.
some settings. I just put on
at least we can hear
participants
ourselves.
should be able to start video now.
Thank you. We're back.
Yeah,
We're back. Thanks, Kelsey.
yeah.
Awesome. All right. And I hope the chat is back.
I'm gonna try.
Yes, looks like it is. All right.
We're being
I'm
traumatized here at Trauma Train Tuesday. Very sorry. Hopefully, the togetherness and the camaraderie will bring us back to some semblance of normalcy. Thank you.
But
Grace.
Amy, you said you had some thoughts or questions?
Grace, I was interested in some of the pieces, the legal pieces around, you know, Kanisha sharing that a $5 fee could put her in this situation, and Billy sharing that when his house was taken, it was only taken for what was owed, and he didn't recoup any of the equity in that. I know that that's another expertise of yours, some of these equity issues and how that plays out.
Yeah, so I think that part of the challenge here is that we don't have enough of an advocacy infrastructure for the number of people who are being attacked. And to the extent to which folks are carrying this as an individual thing, they, you know, as Kanisha said, she didn't have somewhere to turn to ask these questions. And the shaming then makes it hard for people to find resources. You know, usually, you know, if your car breaks down and you don't have a mechanic, you know, you ask all your friends, hey, anybody got a good mechanic? I need my car fixed. When shame is in the way, then people don't ask their friends. Do you know somebody? Is there a resource? How do I find this? So I think that part of the the move towards getting to justice, we will notice it in our ability to talk to each other and network and find the resources needed. Our legal system is very technical, and it's one of the hardest things is that there are kind of these I don't know what else to call it, hard stops where, you know, $5 can make a difference if it's the wrong $5, right? The issue for Kenesha here is going to be that they're going to say you made an agreement and you violated the agreement. Whether it's $5 or $50,000, it's the technicality of the violation of the agreement. And as she said, they're targeting the folks in her building. So what she's got is a pattern of injustice that is being able to kind of be pushed through on these very technical things. So probably my guess, as is often true with evictions, the person doing the evicting has a lawyer. That lawyer has spent their lives trying to find the little technicalities to let somebody kind of win in the legal system, even when it's something minor and not really appropriate. And the defendants don't have lawyers. So these ways of manipulating what a system that was created to try and address the more fundamentals, what under the legal principles of equity is referred to as complete justice. Our legal system is actually supposed to, yeah, look at the technicalities, but then look at the overall picture to say what would complete justice, what would fairness ask for in this situation. I'm concerned that our housing court judges have lost track of any sense of that sense of complete justice. And I don't really know the answer. Whenever we're dealing with an oppression, again, it takes large group action to change a systemic oppression. So I think this piece, I think what I had wanted to say was how critically important it is that you recognize. If the people around you are not recognizing it, it's still critically important that you recognize the trauma that you're going through and do the things you would do to address trauma, the emotional things, the spiritual things, the, you know, I mean, I've often encouraged people to just start a list somewhere where you can keep it and put your hands on it easily. Every time you notice something that helps you kind of breathe deep and exhale, put it on that list. All of us are different. You know, there are things in my house that I have bought that I look at and they just make me smile. I got them because they just make me happy to see them. Put that on your list, because when you're deep in your trauma, you're not going to remember the things that make you feel better. Who's the friend you can always text at any time, day or night, and they'll remind you that they love you? You know, what is there a walk in the woods that makes you feel better? Do you have a you know, spiritual congregation where you could just go to the mosque, the church, the synagogue, and sit and feel better? You know, are you somebody who does bubble baths with candles at night or sits and listens to jazz on Sunday mornings? Make your list. That is your loving yourself list, and use it when you need it. You know, there's comfort food we eat that's not good for us, but then there's often comfort food that's neither bad nor good, and put it on your list so that when you need something to remind yourself that life can be sweet, you can get it. So there are folks with hands up again.
Susan, why don't you go ahead? I'm not super confident that Zoom user is a person, so I'm gonna let you go first.
Grace, thank you
Zoom
so
user,
much
put
for
your-
this. It's
Hold on,
really
Susan, hold
powerful.
on 1 second. Zoom user, put your name in the Zoom in the chat so Amy can deal with you. Sorry, Susan, go ahead.
That's okay. Can everyone hear me all right? So thank you so much, Grace. I feel like there's this continuum and we're all getting pushed a little closer to the edge. People that just never worried about this, even 5 years ago. I feel like myself and many people I know are a couple paychecks away from getting into deep, deep problems or an illness or an accident. I also wanted to mention, I happen to know or know a lot of people who are having the experience that they deeply fear eviction, and this has caused a situation with their landlord where their landlord just terrorizes them. They're so afraid of eviction that their landlord is regularly coming into their apartment and stealing things and looking through personal things, but they're too terrified to report it because they're afraid that they're going to lose their housing. And yeah, so I feel like I'm hearing more and more about that recently. So I'm thinking there's such a continuum. And again, I think we're all collectively, except maybe the 1 or 2%, moving closer and closer to the edge. Thank you.
Well, I think you're reflecting really beautifully exactly what is going on. Another version of this is the folks who don't report serious conditions that need to be fixed in the house and may actually be getting sick because they're living in situations that are actually dangerous to their health, but they don't feel like they can say anything. And it is part of the danger of the policy level stuff where our state government has walked away from guaranteeing shelter, right? These kinds of they're essentially a systematic blaming of the victims. The number of times I still see people say, well, our problem is that there isn't enough housing. I haven't seen a survey in probably 10 years, but historically, Massachusetts has pretty much always had enough housing, even for everybody who's homeless. We are not a housing poor state in that sense, in the sense of, are there enough units? Yes. And I guess there's a mixture of thoughts I have to the example you gave, because it is true that when you're dealing with an oppressive situation, one person standing up, it's easy for them to get taken out. And that is not an unreal fear. If you're the only person who thinks you're experiencing what you described, then there is a real practical question about whether you stand up. But what you have successfully described is not an individual situation. So I think it would be interesting to think more widely about, do we need safe spaces where people can just come and complain and we can start connecting the dots? Would it make sense to look at a policy level thing? The only way it would happen quickly would probably be something at a municipal level. But, do we, for Worcester folks, our chief medical officer considers eviction to be a health issue. Would it be possible, for instance, to ask for a meeting? She's been discouraged by the city leadership, I believe, from acting on that medical analysis. But perhaps, a petition with people all passing it around and saying, yes, we want open sessions addressing the dangers of eviction and homelessness, through the city council in Worcester, and start creating some forums, maybe first with a private nonprofit so that people don't feel like they have to go public, but whatever. There are ways to address the what you've described eloquently as a now systemic problem. And again, I suspect the folks who are scared are not telling anybody these stories. You must be a trustworthy person that people are basically coming out to you and telling you these stories. But my instinct with these kinds of things, again, a little bit like the Me Too movement, the first few folks who did that were terrified. But once it became a place where people found a safe audience to speak out, then you get this kind of avalanche effect where the folks who've been out there, who've been silenced, who've been shamed and isolated start going, hey, wait, hold on, this is everybody. But it's why policy is ultimately a moral statement. And it's why I and others were so horrified that our state government walked away from the commitment to shelter. It is a statement of an immoral position that no civilized society should take. And it tends to move us from group solutions, which is the only way you solve such a widespread problem, to individual blame. And that's always a dangerous place to go. As a society, it's critically important that we take moral positions and that we put out policy goals, which maybe take years to meet, but to put out that this is our shared perception of what a civil and just society looks like is part of the unraveling of the isolation and individual blame that moves us most quickly to such solutions. I think there were more hands up at one point, right?
Yeah, I think Jay has a question.
Oh, I was just going to jump in if Grace wasn't able to connect. But I can tell you that this took us a long time to understand, and the information that Grace has is sharing with you now is based on 17 years or so of analysis of hundreds of cases. And the good news is that we can teach you how to protect yourself. I mean, but it's a systematic problem that people are making money off of, like actively making money off of. And so that's what makes it very difficult to untangle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to say systemic is perhaps not as descriptive as what Jay is pointing out. In terms of predatory loans and foreclosures, we're looking into the trillions of dollars of ill-gotten gains. So this is unfortunately, essentially that injustice is a cornerstone of the economic system that the uber wealthy of the US benefit from. But we've been here before, and I think it's, again, a disadvantage in US society. We don't tell the stories, right? But women went from being property of their husbands to having equal right to own property and get credit, not that it's being carried out, but on the books, through waves of women's movements. Those women's movements were not solely women working together, but men who stepped in at key moments and were in a position of privilege to be able to open the doors wider and make sure that women got closer to equal rights. And these stories of, the ending of slavery, the legalized slavery, these fights to end child labor, to fight for the right to unionize and fight for equal wages. I mean, our history as a country is just jam-packed with stories of huge numbers of people working together and ending things that people thought could never be ended. I mean, today's the 245th anniversary of the ratification of the Massachusetts Constitution. And that was ratified by white male property owners to end legalized slavery of Africans. So the movements happen on the ground, and eventually the hearts and minds of those who need to be shifted, if we do our job right, we have shifted them. And that has happened hundreds, probably thousands of movements in the United States. So to recognize something as systemic is necessary so that people move away from the individual blame and the individual sense of untrue sense of responsibility. But we have to turn that into the knowledge that when we come together, we can make magic. And we have, and we will continue to do so, so long as that story doesn't get lost. I'm wondering if there's more, maybe I should say in response to part of Amy's question earlier, the Mass Alliance Against Predatory Lending, the Worcester Anti-Foreclosure Team, to the extent to which we succeed in bringing people together, we literally teach people how to argue in court, how to understand laws, how to put together your facts for a judge. We used to role play more, which we should get back to doing more of, but we have some homeowners who literally have argued in the appeals courts, in the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, and changed the course of legal decisions in our state. So we know we can do it. We have this sense of sense of professionalism and this idea that we can't do it ourselves. But history shows that we do and we can when we do it together. And that's how we've been able to teach people how to fight for their rights and to some extent succeed. We need a much broader movement to pull down the entire structure of injustice. But we know how to do it now. It's really a question of reconnecting with folks and connecting with new folks so that we have enough people on board. As always, the kind of large numbers necessary to create change. I'm sorry I've gotten called again, but I'll be right back.
I'd be happy to answer questions while Grace is, if I can. Unless, I don't know if Maggie's on too.
That's great. Thank you all so much for backing Grace up and being here with your expertise as well. Sorry it was a little chaotic for a minute there. I do see both Kenesha and Susan, and they're both people I know are real people, have their hands up. So whoever's ready, jump on in and ask your question.
Susan, I can go after you. We are real people. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. I feel very special and real. What I was wondering is, are there any municipalities which have been progressive and have passed any local ordinances that would encourage, more fair practices in purchasing properties? And I'm super familiar with Fitchburg, and at one time Fitchburg had just, I don't know, seemed like thousands of triple deckers where families would live. Now these triple deckers have been bought up and are now housing, like, I don't know, 25 people, individual families per floor. And they've just like made the living conditions horrible. Or they've created luxury. I think the Fitchburg mayor said she's going to create boutique housing, which is, not, it's attractive, but it's not what we need.
Yeah, so Susan, our part of the tricky thing in making change in the structure of our government is that different policies are kind of belong to different layers of government. So housing policy, real property tends to happen at the state level. The way Massachusetts is structured, there are things that can be done at the municipal level that are not too fundamental. But if you go for something really fundamental like rent control, which has been so critical in the time periods when we've had it for making affordable housing, that has to be enabled at the state level. So you can pass it at your municipality, but then your municipality has to do what's called a home rule petition and basically get the state legislature to sign off on it. So on the other hand, it is often easier to organize at the municipal level. So at our best, when we had statewide tenants groups and statewide coalitions that supported local organizing around housing, people would pass something locally, but they would do it at the same time that maybe 10 or 12 other groups in other cities or towns were passing the same thing. And then when it gets to the legislature, instead of it being, oh, Fitchburg's being a pain in the ass and we don't support those policies, blah, blah, blah. What you get is what is essentially a flood at the state level of home rule petitions all coming in on the same basis at the same time. Now, as a legislature, they're looking at what to them is going to look statewide, right? It's going to be like, oh my God, 10 or 12 municipalities, that's a lot. This has to be an actual problem statewide. And you know, I think, again, because we don't tell the stories, we think of organizing as something that's hard to do when actually it's very easy to do. If you go back 30 or 40 years, people used to have block parties every year. And it was a little informal, you know, network of folks who put it on every year. We've lost that sense of kind of local relationship and infrastructure that used to make this kind of thing easy, because you'd go, oh, we want to get our municipality to pass this. Oh, that's right. There's such and such a neighborhood association, and this church over here, everybody in that neighborhood goes to that church. And, you know, we would use our more granular local informal networks. It was relatively easy to get a bigger network together temporarily to accomplish something. So part of our struggle at this time in our history, especially when people are housing poor and likely to move a lot, is to rebuild our local community neighborhood level relationships. Kenesha seems to have her hand up again.
Thank you, Susan, for your question. And I also live in Fitchburg, so I would love for us to connect. For several years, I've been trying to get this license so that my nonprofit could connect and build housing. And for specifically the sectors of people who have been displaced because of sexual assault and domestic violence. And it's always been, well, we already have a nonprofit here that does housing. I'm like, well, it's not a monopoly. I mean, really, and obviously so I thought that things were going to be different. And yeah, the boutique thing is bothersome to me as well. So Susan, thank you for mentioning that. And it goes back to something that you were saying, Grace, and I think Amy or Kelsey, that we're not by ourselves, but sometimes we do feel like we're by ourselves when we're addressing these issues. It's like, why is nobody else seeing this? And other people, I guess, are seeing it, but we don't know where to go. So I thank you for even voicing that. And I also wanted to say one other thing about thank you. And I had a question for you about what happens after eviction. Amy, you said this, and Grace, thank you so much for saying, it's predation, right? All of this is predation. At the end of the day, it comes back to that, and it's scary, but unfortunately, predation has a pattern. So I'm beginning to see that.
Let me step in here for 1 second. Your sense of being alone with the vision that you're carrying, it's right around the corner. You could stand in every local supermarket in Fitchburg with a sign saying, I want to hear from you if you want to see us have more affordable housing in Fitchburg. And if you went and did that in every supermarket for a week, you will have a list of hundreds, if not thousands of names who agree with you. This is what happens when something is a systemic injustice, but people personalize it and think it's theirs alone. It's that shame that's keeping you from all the voices who agree with you. Getting out there, I suspect, in a place where people will see you, you're going to find a flood of people who are experiencing and desperate almost for connecting with others who see the same problem.
Thank you. Grace, what would you say? So someone said, I think it might, I actually don't remember, but they were talking about the possibility being fearful because their landlords hold over their head the eviction situation. And I've seen that and have been experiencing that. So I like to kind of jump into the fear because I'm like, okay, I'm tired of it. What happens after the eviction? So like in my case, I'm going to, I think, see a mediator on Friday. I'm not sure. I've been told I can request that. But let's say it's the worst case scenario in this case, and they're like, okay, you gotta go. I've been reading that I have up to 30 days, but what happens after eviction? Can I never get a home again?
Okay. No. So there's a lot of things happening. First of all, as I said earlier, if you're going to go to mediation, I strongly encourage you to bring a friend, somebody who can be another voice, because unfortunately, although the mediators are required by law to be impartial, we find they often side with the plaintiff and do not give you accurate perception of what your rights are and what you can do. So don't take that as a final whatever. But if you can resolve something in mediation, it's fast, easy, and can give you, a real option. In terms of eviction, if you get ordered to be evicted, and you can possibly, and this is the big problem, is trying to find a new place to move to, you generally can kind of get them. It's expensive to physically move someone against their will. So if you can find a place to move, you might well be able to negotiate some timeline and a process to do it. Homelessness at this point in Massachusetts is a real problem, because having had our governor walk away from sheltering people, there are a ton of folks who simply are without shelter. They're living in a car, they're crashing in a tent in the woods somewhere. Unfortunately, because we're so deep into blaming the victim, some of our municipalities are actually, trying to kind of shoo people away when that's the only place to live. So we have a much more profound conversation to be had. But again, see, we've got to break down this isolation. If every single person who was literally unsheltered right now had the supports to do it and come together, I remember many years ago when we crashed at the State House. I think we stayed there for a week. And basically used the State House as a shelter. We were lucky. We had a couple of legislators who got it and stood on our side and didn't get us dumped out by the State House police. But this is the kind of thing to dramatize things. In Philadelphia, in when would it have been, the late 1990s, folks took over abandoned lots that were, not under construction, but not being used for something else. And they set up tent cities very intentionally. Sometimes would find the owners of the lots and talk to them and be like, look, we'll keep it clean. We'll keep it whatever, they would make an agreement to be there for 3 months, let's say. But it allowed people to make visible an injustice that had been personalized, and then call on the city of Philadelphia to do something. Most of our cities have not an insignificant number of empty units. With the foreclosures, the banks often foreclose and then do nothing with the property for years, and let it disintegrate. So there are housing options out there that our government could step in and insist that those dwellings be used to house people, even if it was temporarily. So there are collective solutions, but again, we've got to get past the individual isolation and shame to get there. I don't know if that answered.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm not
Maybe,
sure where we go from here, Amy.
I wanted to ask, because Kenesha made me think of it. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of outcomes you've seen Like, is this a doom and gloom scenario, or do people, like, I know, Kanisha's worried about, like, okay, so what's coming next? Is this gonna put me on a path of permanent housing instability? Is that what the research
I
shows,
didn't
or does the
answer.
research show
Right,
that
I didn't.
people can
Yeah,
recover?
right, hold on. So I didn't answer one of her things. So the landlord associations in Massachusetts have illegally been using the dockets of the housing court eviction cases to identify people that they considered, quote, bad renters. Their way they were using the information was inaccurate as well as predatory, I would argue, because it turned out that they weren't checking whether you actually lost the eviction case or not. They weren't checking whether the eviction was lost over something you were responsible for or not. They were just going, oh, Amy's name is on an eviction case. I'm not going to rent to her. So the state, thank God, just passed a law after a lot of work from advocates to make it so you can seal your eviction record. And that way stop landlords from trolling the eviction case law in our state to find your name and illegally discriminate against you. That's going to have some very significant positive impact. You have to seal it. There's a process. There's, I think, a bill right now to try and just have them all sealed after a certain number of years. But right now there is a way to seal them. So one thing to do is to seal your record kind of as soon as you need to. All right. So one of our folks wanted to be on this call, and I think was one of the people who was unmuting and had noise in the background. I don't know if there's anything to do about getting him back on. Maybe I'll just
Yeah,
share.
I don't see anybody in the waiting room, but if the person joins again, we'll let him back in.
Okay, well, you probably blocked him because he was part of that deluge we were getting.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. That was quite out of control. Yeah, I don't know how he was trying to sign in. Actually, I could potentially call him myself and you guys could hear him through me. Should we try that?
If you think it'll be helpful, do you want to talk at all? People have said no fault eviction. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's kind of a meaningless term in my experience. No fault is this idea that someone says, oh, I want to end your lease and do something else with the property. So, you have to move. And we're seeing a lot of that because they really do. They want to increase the rent amounts, which of course people can't afford anyway. And it's problematic that there is such a thing. I'm thinking that if you want to speak through my audio. Okay. All right. So hold on. I'm answering something else right now. Hold on. Yeah, I mean, the answer is that to the extent to which this is really an expression of a system-wide breakdown in housing, short term, it is going to be hard potentially to find housing that's affordable in a reasonable amount of time. And so we are in this kind of like, hopefully it's the bottom of the U and we get back up relatively quickly, but that's going to, again, depend on us coming together to organize. But no, people are rarely homeless their entire lives. That's very uncommon. It tends to be short term. Right now, Susan's description of 25 people on a floor of a triple decker house is the expression of folks having to double and triple up because of unaffordable housing, either needing 2 or 3 families to pay because the rates are way too high, or simply because people need a place to crash that's not on the street. But it's an expression, of course, of a bigger systemic problem. As I said, there's housing out there. If your mayor's talking about creating boutique housing, that means she knows there's housing out there and she's trying to repaint it, so to speak, for a particular constituency. But it means there is housing out there. So is that Crystal raising her hand? I don't know.
I don't see a hand raised, but thank you for that.
Okay.
That was helpful to hear that
So
it's not a long term.
the smart policy that we were headed for at one point in the last 20 years was this concept of housing first, where we make sure that people are housed first. And if they need services to stay in the housing, like getting over, alcoholism or drug treatment or needing some kind of counseling or whatever, we house people first and then get them any support services they need to stay in that housing. That policy has been well proven by social science research to be effective. Um, we got close to getting a commitment in Massachusetts to the concept of housing first, but we didn't quite get there. And then we started into the downward slope since the foreclosure crisis, 2008, et cetera. So if folks don't mind, I'd like to give Lafette a chance to speak, if that's all right, through my mic. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Good evening, Grace. No, good afternoon.
Can people hear him?
Hello.
Yes, they can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I mean, what we're doing now is very beautiful. It's the way to go about it. But the aspect I really want to focus on is the emotional aspect after the facts. Let's say, for instance, somebody that already been in foreclosure. So therefore, how do we go about that? Emotional recovery. Practical support. Family restoration. It's so big. Is there any way, any resources available that working? Because it will become like the way you said to the gentleman earlier, a kind of PTSD. Because losing two houses, or even when you lose one, is already too much. I myself, I cannot even try by the property that I lost. It cost me so much. Or on the other hand, my kids will take their car and park in front of the house I already lost. How do we deal with things like that? Is there any resources that for family like me will get affected?
Well, so part of my excitement about Amy reaching out is that she is a trauma counselor. This is the kind of thing that she does. And because, as we've been talking about it, early in the unraveling of an oppression, shame tends to separate people. So Amy and I were talking, and I'm sure she'll have some thoughts coming out of this about the importance of perhaps having a support group, a time, even if it's remote by Zoom or whatever, that people could come together and share the experience, because one of the healing pieces is looking in someone else's eyes, and where you may not be able to do it for yourself and recognize your own personal value given what's happened. It's sometimes easier to see that in another person. You hear their story and you go, oh my God, this isn't their fault. And sometimes that then helps us hold a mirror up to ourselves and see that it also wasn't our fault. Your family may need some trauma counseling for the whole family together, so that you don't end up with people blaming each other inside the family for what was a traumatic experience that was dumped on your family. There are strategic options that we've done a few times, but take some real organizing, where, for instance, if the house is still empty, people have gone in and retaken the house. It's complicated and it's legally tricky. But sometimes the physical retaking of the house, for instance, in a case such as yours, where there was no eviction case, they never legally took over the right to live in the house. You have to, in Massachusetts law, do that through the courts. You can't just go, oh, hey, Amy's house looks like it's empty this 6 months. I think I'll move in there. That's not the way our laws work. If somebody, is away on active military service for a 2-year tour of duty, it doesn't mean somebody else can just go, oh, look, there's an empty house, I think I'll move in. So that's another option. And I think maybe it would be helpful, and others on this call have more direct experience of this than I do. But there are stages, like there are stages of dealing with trauma. And when you're in the midst of the first raw period of trauma, unless you've arranged the space in your life to handle it, just diving back into it without more resources to heal from it is not necessarily wise. And so, you know, I talked about creating a list for yourself of all the things you've ever known help you to breathe again, help you to exhale again. I would certainly create that list before I dove back into the trauma. On the other hand, we know that if you don't address and actively heal from trauma, you set yourself up for it being, it's like having a, you know, a shaky stack of sticks. And if you leave it standing there, the first time that someone brushes by, it's going to fall over. So to leave raw trauma unhandled, unhealed, unaddressed is actually to put yourself in a dangerous position where when something similar happens, you're going to be dealing with the new trauma and the old trauma as if it was just happening then for the first time. We as human beings store trauma in its original form inside ourselves unless we heal it. And so to strengthen yourself, to help your kids heal, it's important to create the space, the safe spaces, the intentional time periods when you can address that trauma. And I say this as somebody who was sexually abused as a child. We sometimes tell ourselves, oh, that's in the past. I don't need to deal with it. That's not true. Part of your psyche lives in that trauma until you deal with it. And the trick, as I've often said to people, is when you find yourself in your next period of stability in your life, you want to actively unpack the last bad trauma you were in. So the trick is actually, and people will say, oh, I don't want to deal with that. I'm finally feeling stable and feeling better. You're going to end up dealing with it again. So choose to do it at a time when you are in a place where you are surrounded by people who will accept the full story, where you're loved, where you have the resources, the places to go, where you have some time available in your life, and actively go after it. I've said to people, there's never a demon that I've faced that I regretted facing later. This trauma is a demon. You carry it around with you. And so to choose consciously your own healing process at times when you have more resources is part of reaching the strength that you can come to. Eventually, trauma that has been healed does begin to recede into the past. It still remains yours. You still learn from the lessons, you still grow from it. But it stops being, as I said, like that shaky stack of sticks that could get knocked over and inevitably gets knocked over at the worst possible time when you're at your weakest. So the trick is to go after it and build the strength to address it and to create the space in your life to say to yourself, and it's a good message to your injured self, to remind your injured self that you matter, that you are worthy of the time, the love, and attention from yourself as well as others to heal that part of yourself, value that part of yourself, teach that part of yourself that it does not need to shame, it does not need to hide, it does not need to be something that is kind of put away in a box. Instead, find in that part of yourself the lovable self, the valuable self, and you will find this has been true human beings. Often we gain our greatest wisdom by facing our hardest experiences. Jay, I see a hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to echo what you were saying. I mean, it's very, It can be very confusing. It can be very complicated. Sometimes, there's multiple cases that happen. But what I've found, and this took me way too long to really work on, is getting a regular meditation practice. I've been doing yin yoga, which is a very slow moving yoga. And when I started like 5 years ago, because of this situation and past things, like I literally would vibrate when I was like at rest. Like there's like trauma is like this energy that when you are in it, your brain can't process it. So it goes into your body. It like literally goes into your cells. There's a book that was like 2014, The Body Keeps the Score, where it really talks about how it's really a physiological phenomenon, not just like this kind of
Well, it's actually, Jay, if I can, it's very important what you're saying in terms of the connection to physical harm, because it's why we're seeing so much ill health,
yeah.
injury, and even death among people who are fighting foreclosures. And again, that self-blame, that individualizing, like, oh, if I just stayed on top of my diabetes, it really wouldn't have been such a problem. But under stress, it's hard to stay on top of your diabetes. And those kinds of things tend to trigger. So thank you for bringing in the physical element of this.
And a lot of times I've found, and this is very hard, and I'm still, Grace will tell you, it's not always successful, but just trying to reset as much as possible. Like sometimes you get so caught up in like trying to chase and figure all this stuff out, and oftentimes it's more important to actually stop and actually assess what you've learned and kind of document each thing than trying to dive into something deep. Because these are, I mean, I'm not even sure I'm at the bottom of the rabbit hole after 5 years, but these are.
You're not necessarily, but I think what's important here is that our culture, and I'm glad you brought me back to this, Jay, we are as a society what's referred to as an addictive culture. Addiction is what happens when you find something that gives you temporary relief, but does not solve the underlying problem, but it's immediate. You feel better because, you went and drank yourself to the point where you didn't even remember anymore. That seems like a short-term solution. Of course, it actually makes it worse because now you're adding another layer of ill health and trauma on top of the trauma that you had. But what this is an expression of is that our society doesn't know how to handle pain. We really think that there will be a fast, quick solution and pain will go away. This is not the standard human experience. We heal from pain, and it takes time and it takes steps. And if we are guided by a healer, we can often take those steps as effectively as possible and get better. But in terms of these situations with housing, the way this expresses itself, and I think Jay actually coined this phrase, is the looking for a solution that we refer to as the bright, shiny object. Like, oh, I'm going to do the one right thing in court. Oh, I'm going to, make the one right, correct payment and get back on track. Usually when we're in trouble, it took a while to get into the mess, and it'll take a while to get out of the mess. That doesn't mean you don't have to do things that give you a moment to really breathe. And sometimes a short-term thing that makes you feel better does that. But be careful that you don't use it in the place of doing the actual healing, of doing the actual longer-term fight for justice. But if all you do is focus on the immediate technical, practical solution, then you're ignoring the harm that is being done to you ongoingly by the trauma. And that does not help you function well. We know from the studies on shock to the human system that when you're in shock, You may be able to, walk on a broken foot or run on a broken foot to get away from the wild animal that is attacking you, and your body has properly shut down your ability to feel the fact that you broke your foot. But if you stay in that state of shock, an adrenaline rush that allows you to do things that might seem superhuman in that situation, you actually then overdrain your system. And it's dangerous. When you're in shock, don't drive a car, don't use heavy machinery, because it's like part of your normal awareness has been purposefully shut down by your body so that you can handle the crisis. But if you stay in crisis mode, you will actually start making less and less appropriate, complicated decision making, which is what human beings are so extraordinarily good at. So avoid keeping yourself in this heightened state of adrenaline, and avoid keeping yourself kind of looking for the shiny, bright, immediate object, because it will actually distract you from seeing peripheral things that sometimes are where the real answer is, and sometimes just take a little longer to get there. We have to increase our pain threshold. We have to increase our capacity to stand being in pain long enough to learn from what the pain is trying to tell you. People who actually do not have pain sensors, like lepers, may end up losing an entire hand because they didn't feel it. So our pain system is an early warning system telling us, hey, you need to look over here to fix this because there's something bad happening. And our culture somehow teaches us that pain is our enemy. Pain is our friend. It's a warning system in your body, whether it's emotional or physical, that is trying to tell you, look over here, this needs some attention. So running away from pain when it's not overwhelming, there is, when pain gets overwhelming, your body gets into this cascade effect where the pain takes over. Most of us have had this experience when you, for instance, got a really bad poison ivy or a lot of bug bites. You get to the point where you feel like your whole body's itching and you can't think. That is a cascade effect. Once you're in the cascade effect, you've got to get out of it because your body's too overwhelmed to handle it. But if you're not in the cascade effect yet, see pain as your friend. It's a messenger telling you where to look, telling you where to pay attention, and to move from what might seem like, oh, maybe if you get a practical solution here, I won't have to feel the pain. That is not helpful. You will be more able to use the practical solution once you're out of the most emergency level of the pain and you can put your whole mind and attention onto it. So this is one of these practices for dealing with pain and trauma that we are not in our general culture taught. Those of you who have a stronger spiritual base, and who lean back on God, whatever you call her, him, them, know that you can be in pain and lean back on something greater than yourself and not have to put the pain aside and experience healing. It's different for different people, but it is part of the human condition that when we can lean back on something, could be a best friend's love, could be a parent, could be an adult child who you've learned how to live in the world as an equal with. You know, there are times when you need to be able to lean back. I always love the poem about the footprints in the sand. There are times when we need to, as human beings, let ourselves be carried. And that is different for different people. Some people, it's community, family, spirituality, whatever it is. Notice those times, but don't use something that's an immediate fix so that you never feel the pain. Instead, find somebody or some power greater than you with whom you can share the pain and reach for the wisdom and healing that is your birthright as a human being, but that makes you actually stronger and more resilient in the future.
That was beautiful.
Grace, do you think there are a couple of people that have mentioned, did they had some notices that were coming? Could you maybe do a historic kind of example timeline on what like a first year and then what
Yeah,
happens
I'm
after,
gonna
so people
need
can
to
prepare?
go because I'm gonna need to go because I have to get to my press conference, but I guess
Oh,
the things to be aware of is if you get private correspondence from a landlord or a lawyer, do not ignore it, but remember they are not a judge. What they send you is not final, it's a beginning point. If you're dealing with court notices, the most critical thing for court culture is that you have to not miss deadlines, and you have to act respectfully to the judge, even if they're being a complete jerk. That doesn't mean you can't set a boundary and insist on your rights, but be careful of letting your emotion disrespect a judge, because culturally, in the culture of our courts, that's problematic. In terms of if you are dealing with legal communications and there is no timeline given to you in that legal communication, this is the hardest thing for people who are not lawyers, because none of this stuff is published anyplace easy to find. So if you're dealing with court, you've got to get in touch with an organization that does advocacy in that area. And as I said, part of the trick here is to get past the shame so that you can network your way to the right people. I'm inclined, Amy, if it was okay with you, to close up because of my
Absolutely.
next event.
I know you have to get going, and we're just so grateful that you gave so much of your time when obviously there's lots of demands on your time. We're gonna post the recording pretty soon after, and we will also be making sure to put the link for MAAPL and ways to get in touch with you. I know people really need this information, and our hope is to just have this one link that people can get sent and find all the resources.
Let's send the link as well for the Worcester anti-foreclosure team, since so much of your audience is local to the greater Worcester County area.
That would be great.
That would be awesome.
Grace,
And
do you want to talk, is there anything about tomorrow you wanted to mention, or?
no,
Okay.
this is not the time for that.
Jay,
No,
will certainly, you can send me information too if there's things you want shared or posted with this, where we will be happy to do that. We're really grateful to connect people to the support and services you guys are providing the community with. It's so important, so crucial.
Grace,
That
Grace will handle
people
that.
benefited today.
yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that I guess I most want to say to people is remember your birthright. As human beings, we have a right to place and a right to home, not to the exclusion of others, but as a collective right. And don't let anything that ever happens to you make you feel like you don't deserve a safe place to live. You do. And there can never be, that can never be the right of a human being. Don't let anybody ever take that sense of yourself away from yourself.
Excellent. Another great spot to just stop on. And we're at time anyways. And we really, again, appreciate all you offered in the audience. Thank you so much for everything you shared. Sorry we traumatized you a little bit with that Zoom bombing. We all recouped and did a beautiful job. It was wonderful. They can't bring us down. I'm seeing a lot of
And
comments about how much people really did learn from the law, the emotional pieces. This was a great comprehensive coverage of a really complex, impactful topic.
well,
Thank you so
I
much.
want to thank you, Amy, for your insight and wisdom and vision of what trauma counseling can be and the healthy world that I know you want to help usher in.
Thank you. I look forward to partnering with you to make it happen.
Bye, folks.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
And I put the link in the chat there for folks to take the quick survey. I saw a couple folks did that. We really appreciate it. That helps us continue as Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma to be able to offer free trainings and continue as an organization doing this great work.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, for your very graceful hostessing. Take care, everybody.
Be well.
Bye.